Years ago, Edda the Owl Lady vanished from the Boiling Isles, leaving behind an empty house and a single eerie briefcase adorned with a giant gold eye. Despite numerous attempts by the Emperor's coven to access the portal within, every effort failed, and eventually, the matter was left undisturbed. Then, one day, the briefcase activated, delivering a letter requesting a meeting. In the heart of a secure Emperor's Coven facility on the Boiling Isles, a room existed. The entire structure was built around it. Within this room lay an object crucial to the Emperor's plans, one that was both essential and potentially threatening. And the guard tasked with overseeing this object? Sound asleep. Steve? Snore. Steve? Snore. The other guards sighed, shaking their head above the slumbering figure. They shifted their spear to one hand, lifted a foot, and planted it firmly on Steve's chair. With a shove, the chair tipped back, sending Steve crashing to the floor with a startled shriek. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead," the guard smirked, leaning over him. "Jones," Steve growled from the floor. "Don't you know to let sleeping guards lie?" "Guess you don't want me to take over since your shift is done," Jones replied sarcastically, extending a hand to help him up. Steve grumbled but accepted the assistance. "Anything to report?" Jones asked, momentarily serious. "No, same as the last 4 years," Steve replied, gesturing toward the center of the room. There, a spotlight illuminated a briefcase featuring a large gold eye. "Heh," Jones chuckled, taking a seat. "How would you know with your eyes closed so much?" Yeah, Steve waved dismissively as he retrieved his spear from the wall. "See you tomorrow." "I'd wish you a good night, but it looks like you already got a head start." Jones laughed as Steve headed for the door. Suddenly, several loud thunks echoed behind him. Steve slowly turned, noticing Jones standing rigid, having dropped their spear, their empty hand raised awkwardly as they stared at the center of the room. Steve gulped and turned fully, his eyes widening at the sight of the door that had replaced the briefcase. The yellow eye blinked twice before the door cracked open, just enough for a small envelope to slip out. The envelope floated down to the floor as the door clicked shut again. Before either guard could react, the door folded back into the familiar briefcase. Both guards remained frozen for a few moments before, in unison, they lunged for the large button labeled Alarm. "Are you ready?" Lilith Clawthorne, leader of the Emperor's Coven, asked her second-in-command. "As ready as I'll ever be for first contact with the humans," Amity Blight replied, running her hands through her lavender hair to smooth the loose strands of her undercut. Her golden eyes fixated on the briefcase at the end of the room, impatience evident on her face. Just as she was about to suggest this was a hoax, the briefcase trembled. It suddenly shot upward, unfolding to reveal a large door with a glowing gold eye staring back at them. The scouts under Lilith and Amity's command shuffled nervously across the room. "Easy, scouts," Amity called out, scanning the line. "They're just humans. No need to fret over such weak creatures." No magic meant that any hostilities would be decidedly one-sided, Amity reasoned, as she glanced back at the door, waiting. Slowly, the door opened, revealing a shimmering gold portal. Lilith and Amity prepared themselves. The portal shimmered with unnatural golden energy. As the guards watched, something in the portal fluctuated, an outline of someone forcing their way through. The guards around Lilith and Amity tightened their grips on their spears. One outline transformed into another as several humans emerged from the doorway, all clad in the same green uniforms and wielding strange staves made of an unfamiliar material. They split evenly, half going left and half going right, halting to face the witches with an aggressive stance. They held their staves at the ready, angled but not yet aimed directly at them. Then 2 humans strode in after them, scanning the room with careful scrutiny, taking in every detail, including both witches and humans present. Both were tan, sharing similar features that suggested they were at least sisters, if not twins. However, their appearances diverged from there. The one in the back wore a green uniform with shorter hair and spots on her face, nary a wrinkle in sight. She didn't carry a staff but walked closely behind the other, peeking around her shoulder. The other wore her green uniform open, revealing a striped shirt beneath and a small red beret atop her long hair. Fingerless gloves adorned her hands, and she carried a shorter staff, keeping it pointed toward the floor. With a flick of her free hand, the other human guards relaxed their aggressive stance, lowering their staves into a similar position. Amity glanced at Lilith, waiting for her mentor to make a move, while the Coven guards shifted nervously with their spears. Many silently wished for some of the mechanical staves from the armory for this mission. Across from them, the human guards stood like statues, their staves angled down and slightly to their left, watching the witches before them. The lead woman, meanwhile, stood by the door, a small white stick moving from one side of her mouth to the other. After thoroughly inspecting the room, the human in charge raised a hand, and with a small pop revealed that the stick in her mouth was covered with a small sphere of something sweet. She held it there momentarily before speaking, then replaced the candy. "You're clear." Finally, two more individuals emerged from the portal and approached Lilith and Amity, with the human sisters falling slightly behind them. The first, a slightly older woman in a professional skirt and jacket, led the way, stopping just short of the delegation. The second, surprisingly, was a witch. Lilith's focus narrowed to her as they approached, quickly shaking her head and turning to the human. "Hello," the older woman said with a slight dip of her head as the group stopped before Lilith and Amity. "I am Camilla Nocida, the representative from what you call the human realm." "We are honored to have you, Miss Nocida," Lilith replied in a diplomatic tone, bowing slightly alongside Amity. "Welcome to the Boiling Isles." Amity straightened, her gaze drifting from Camilla to what she assumed was her human counterpart standing behind her. The human was looking at Lilith but turned to her sister as the latter nudged her. Fiddling with the candy stick in her mouth, she exchanged a nod with her sister, then turned to meet Amity's gaze. Smirking, she popped the candy out and sent a playful wink in Amity's direction. Amity felt her face flush with annoyance. "I see you have found someone as well," Lilith remarked, glancing at the witch beside her, utterly unaware of her protégé's embarrassment. "Yeah. Hey there, Lily. Fancy seeing you here," Ada replied, her signature smirk in place as she stepped up next to the human. The kind of smirk that signaled she knew she held all the cards over her sister. "Thought I'd drop by and see which sap old Buckethead sent to greet the humans. Didn't expect you, though." Lilith hummed coldly. "I should have known you vanished to the human realm all those years ago." "Yeah, funny that," Ada shrugged, inspecting her nails. "They may have their issues, but it turns out they know the value of living life." Lilith narrowed her eyes before turning back to Camilla, speaking in a diplomatic tone once more. "I apologize for any trouble my sister may have caused." Camilla raised an eyebrow but maintained an even tone. "It was no trouble at all. I enjoyed our time together, and I learned a lot about your isle." "Be that as it may," Lilith countered, her gaze returning to the smirking Ida. "She is still a wild witch, and now that we have found her, my sister must join a coven." Lilith raised a hand, idly pointing forward as the coven guards stepped forward, beginning to lower their spears. Suddenly, there was a sharp snap, freezing everyone in place as the human guards moved in unison, raising their staves in a blink of an eye. The coven guards exchanged uncertain glances. Amity's grip tightened on her saber hilt at the sudden movement, her mind racing as she glanced at the human guards, realizing she had almost forgotten about them. She cursed her oversight. Lilith appeared just as surprised, while Camilla barely blinked, and the owl lady only grinned wider. Amity's gaze was drawn to the human.